welcome to today's episode of Not Quite So Daily Musings, but I'm not sure what the frequency is going to be yet at this point, so I haven't actually changed the title of these episodes. I wanted to share something that's been on my mind for a couple days, and it's the idea of suffering. So, nice light topic today, but I think it's important, at least it's important to me. So, when I was younger, I used to be one of those people. This is totally fine. I'm not about to make judgments. But I was one of those people who didn't participate in the news at all. So I didn't read the news. It was too negative. I didn't want to bring down my vibe. I'm a pretty sensitive person. So, it can wreck my day to read about the horrible crimes that people are committing all across the world. And not even just crimes, but natural disasters and all things like this too. So I felt that by consuming news, which is largely negative, almost always, right? It was going to surround me with negativity, and it was going to make my energy like heavier and weightier. Where I wanted to be this sort of light and buoyant, joyful person. I'm an optimist by nature, and I wanted to kind of, experience that energy level and not be burdened by the heaviness of the news. And so I've moved away from that a little bit. But I think that there's this distinction between that sort of like the nightly news, what's the murder of the day or whatever it is, versus maybe so that's more of like the spectacle type news versus important. I don't want to say that's not important because it totally is. It's important to the people who have suffered these scenarios. If there's been a local murder or a local robbery, there's very real people who are impacted by that, and it's perhaps worth knowing about just for that reason. But if I'm to strike a balance with my sensitivity level to news, then I think it's more worthwhile to find high quality news in targeted doses. So not immersing myself in it 24/7, but maybe, a few hours a week or something like that. So that I'm making sure that the news that I am engaging with is news that, perhaps has like a wider relevance to me, and even if it's negative, which it often is, it feels a little bit more. It doesn't pull me with despair. But the thing I wanted to really talk about, that was sort of the preamble, is it seems pretty important to not look away from suffering because it makes you uncomfortable or because it can feel negative and you just want to be surrounded by positivity. I get that because I've done that for a big chunk of my life. The thing about it though is that if you I want to bring it to a statistic that I read, and please someone validate it or not, so take it with a grain of salt, but the War on Cancer did a study on how frequently cancer patients get ghosted by friends or family members. And it was something like 65% of people who had a cancer diagnosis experienced some degree of ghosting from loved ones. And this is a hugely variable statistic. So it could be, one casual friend just stops talking to them, to a spouse who separates from them, or things like that. I've read a lot of anecdotes on this as well. And apparently this is, not having experienced cancer myself, or I've experienced it kind of peripherally in my family. It's not something that I have that firsthand experience with, but apparently it's a pretty common experience for, particularly for husbands to leave wives who have a cancer diagnosis. I think with a lot of families, it sort of shifts the caregiving status quo, where a lot of times women tend to play the role, at least in especially more traditional marriages, especially older marriages as well, where they're doing a lion's share of the cooking and tending to the people and the things in the household. So when a wife in a traditional arrangement gets sick and is unable to do these things, then the stereotypical husband is in this caregiver role, which he doesn't want, never had. And this can often create a lot of conflict, can result in divorce and separation at a rate that's far above and beyond what I would have imagined, because it just seems incredibly cruel, right? From an outsider's perspective. How could you leave your spouse who's undergoing such a scary experience? How could you stop talking to your friend because they're going through this and they need you? So it's very easy to judge from the outside this experience, but given how prevalent it is, it seems that I think us humans in general just are really uncomfortable with death, and we're really uncomfortable with suffering for a variety of reasons. We don't like looking at suffering. We don't like feeling negativity. We don't like feeling uncomfortable. That kind of awkward feeling inside when we can't say anything or do anything to make something better for someone. When maybe we're expected to share the burden a little bit. If it's someone that we care about, maybe we feel the weight of responsibility. Like all of a sudden we have to participate more in the relationship. We have to do more chores or help them out, or maybe there's the idea that this expectation could exist. There's a lot of reasons why I think people who, not just people who experience cancer, but people who are suffering, get this experience, this really terrible experience of people pulling away from them. And just to share my own kind of experience with this as well, I lost I've talked about this a little bit on the channel before, but I lost a baby when I was 23. So I had a stillborn child, and it was, really awful, of course. It was horrifying. And what I found really interesting was how no one wanted, I shouldn't say no one, but most people did not want to talk about it with me at all. Anytime it came up, there was a sort of like deer in the headlights look, it made them uncomfortable, I think, to think that I would be like, am I going to start crying or something? I think it's people, I think, mean well, but maybe are afraid of hurting the person who's suffering. So as someone who's suffering, whether it's from a cancer diagnosis or other health issue or other tragedy that's occurred in your life, I think other people are afraid of causing you discomfort. But the thing that I would encourage you guys to do, if you are in the position of supporting anyone who's going through a really difficult time, I don't want to say this is going to be universally true. This is my experience. Is it really helps to talk about it, and I really, really appreciated the people in my life who looked me in the eye and just asked me how I was doing, and weren't afraid to confront the elephant in the room, as opposed to dancing around it and trying to distract me and trying to just think about nice things instead. If you're suffering, that's all you're experiencing, like all day long, every day, all night. Of course you're going to want to, again, not universal, but of course I was going to want to talk about it. And I felt like basically just a deep sense of loneliness that so few people in my life seem to want to go through that with me. I do remember specifically my doctor acknowledging it, looking me right in the eye and saying, this must be a nightmare for you right now. It's like, yeah, that's all I want. I want someone to say that. I want someone to acknowledge that I'm suffering. I want someone to look me in the eye and see my suffering. And it just makes it feel a little bit less lonely. And I remember, my mother and grandmother also. My grandmother's experienced loss as well, so I think that she can understand suffering on that sort of personal level. So this is turning into a little bit of a long conversation, but circling down back around to the news, what I was sharing about with avoiding the news. I think that there's virtue in looking suffering in the eye and not turning away from it. There's all kinds of just horrible things that happen in the world all the time. This is basically part of being human. As long as there's been humans, there's been like murder and war and famine and pain and suffering. Is like a Buddhist tenet, right? Like all life is suffering. So to turn away from it, on the one hand, you're also turning away from a part of what it means to be human. It's almost like you fracture your experience of being a human because you're not acknowledging something. It's sort of like avoiding death as well, because death is such a fundamental aspect of being a human. And it's such a terrifying prospect, I think, to a lot of people to actually stare death in the face, whatever that means. Whether it's someone who's dying or whether it's your own thoughts late at night, whatever it happens to be that you're trying to shut off. But to look it in the eye and see it for what it is, because there's sort of allows you to just be a little bit more human, a little bit more yourself, and a little bit more whole. Not to mention that with all of the suffering there is in the world, if you are to look at it and not flinch away from it, what that might mean to the person on the other end of that suffering, to see someone else's suffering and to feel it, and to be brave enough to accept that there's going to be pain, and looking suffering in the face is going to feel painful to you as well. It's the condition of having empathy. Empathy isn't just sharing joy, it's also sharing pain. But that pain is okay, in the sense that that pain is just a core part of being a human being. And by feeling the pain of other people's suffering, it also allows us to be propelled towards some kind of action, to do something about it, however small. I'm not saying we all need to quit our jobs and go try to save the world, but certainly it can make us more compassionate by, at the very least, not flinching away from other people's suffering. It's the very least we could do. I know that someone who's starving, there's millions of people who are starving right now. It means nothing to them that some random white girl in Canada is feeling bad about that. It does not help at all. I totally accept that. So I don't want to try to make it seem like, this is, virtue signaling or whatever you would call that. But it's, by doing that, I think it takes a type of courage and it creates a type of wholeness, which leads the way to more compassion, which could then lead the way to future action, or at least to maybe slightly orienting your life in a way that's a little bit less self-serving and a little bit more in the direction of helping other people in whatever small way that is. That's all I wanted to say today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.